Hey everyone, Mark and Steve here.
Before we get started today, we want to let you know about Dare to Connect, our new online interactive video platform.
For less than the cost of a therapy session, you and your spouse get live access to both of us 3 times a week.
Each 30-minute live group support session provides interactive mentoring and healing for addicts, spouses, and couples.
If you're loving our podcast and our unique style of bringing you recovery, you're going to love Dare to Connect.
To learn more, go to daretoconnectnow.com. We're looking forward to seeing and working with you. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the PBSE podcast. I'm Steve Moore, here with Mark Castleman. It's good to be with you guys today. Today's podcast is a good one. It's a topic we haven't talked about probably in at least a month or two. But
at least a month or two.
At least a month or two. You can tell there are a lot of similar issues with this. But no, it's one we're happy to address, and it actually comes from one of our listeners from last week. So we so appreciate this spouse writing into us, spouse of an addict. So there were basically, the long story short, just some background information is they have been married for some time, roughly about 15 years, roughly about 2 years ago, even though there have been kind of variations in the sexual interest in the relationship and some other warning signs. About 2 years ago, the spouse kind of concretely discovered the extent of some of his acting out behaviors with pornography and other forms of acting out. And that kind of became a reality for her. And she's been working on her own stuff as well as trying to work on her marriage ever since. And a big piece of this pattern for him has been a lot of lying and deception as well, as is the case, for a lot of addicts. As you know, we oftentimes do a lot of running and a lot of deceiving in order to cover up the shame and the hurt and all the other stuff with this. And then the second paragraph we'll actually go ahead and quote, and this is kind of where we'll start today. My husband is a wonderful man, but I have the gut feeling he's been lying to me. He goes in spurts, and where he is very aggressive sexually, says words jokingly like, we're going to take that out, just fill it in with that, whatever demeaning sexual vernacular you want to include there, or other inappropriate sexual words to me. This is also focusing on sexual acts that I know he enjoyed watching, meaning pornography. I become very offended. Then I feel like that dies down for a period of time. Is this a clue that when he is acting out versus not? I have stopped checking his phone, spying on him, or really even asking. Everywhere that I have read about porn use tells me there is no way he stopped without support or help. Is this true? What are the other telltale signs that he is using again? I wish he would do a podcast that specifically focused on these signs that a wife can look for. Without him wanting to get help or even being honest with me, there is no way for us to really move forward. I feel really stuck and alone. It's a hard one.
Yeah, it's such a big topic. We'll try to do it the best we can. So let's just jump right into it, because Steve and I can tell you from our own personal experience when we were in our heavy addiction years that we, as addicts, we go to great lengths to keep our behaviors hidden. We try to throw people off the track.
Yes.
There's all sorts of gaslighting that goes on where we try to convince our spouse that, she's the crazy one. And I was especially, I don't even like the word to use. I was going to use the word good. I was especially good at this. I was especially effective at this, adept.
Yeah.
I was the great stealthy addict. Or man, the lengths I went to cover my tracks, I can't begin to describe to you. In fact, I don't want to give any listeners ideas about how to cover their tracks, so I won't tell you how I did that. But
so true.
Discovery to me was worse than dying.
Absolutely.
I must not be discovered at any cost, period.
Mm-hmm.
So this dear lady that wrote into us, man, my wife could relate to that. So many that I work with, when you've got a partner or husband that's doing everything he can to hide and cover his tracks, it just gets insane. Life just gets insane.
Absolutely.
But how, and it's impossible if someone refuses to be honest and transparent and authentic. Is there some magical foolproof formula that you can use to determine if he's using or not? There really isn't.
Yeah.
And that's the really frustrating part. We can't give you any guaranteed method to tell you whether he's currently active in his addiction or he isn't. Yes. But we can at least give you some signs, some road posts along the way that at least can give you an idea if there's some strong possibilities about that.
Yeah. There's a lot in this this message, and I know our podcasts are brief, and so we're gonna, just as always, we're gonna be kind of skimming the surface with this, but we do want to give a starting point. As many of you know who are longtime listeners, we do have a program that we've been running for some time now called Dare to Connect, where we do go in depth with these issues with addicts, spouses, and couples, with 3 support sessions every single week that are, well, they're supposed to be half an hour. These days they're running more like 40 minutes every time.
I know, we always
because we just love to blab and talk, but really great support system there. Really good network of people in the chat window and the log. We do a lot of interacting with the audience, and would invite you guys to take a look at that at daretoconnectnow.com. But yeah, let's jump kind of into this and break these questions down, Mark, if that's okay. We've got kind of 3 main questions that we asked here, and we'll kind of break these down and work through one by one. The first one, really what one thing that this listener is asking is pornified, I call it, or objectified language and behavior in a marriage an indication he is still acting out, right? Using really crass language. Oftentimes that can involve other things like sexually violent behavior or aggressive behavior, more so than a partner is comfortable with, right? Are those things an indication of if he is still acting out?
Well, I can tell. So I'll just cut straight to my addiction experience. I can tell you this absolutely was a definite sign that I was acting out again.
Yeah. So
my language would change. I would start to become more, more dicey, more, more crass in my language with my wife. Sexual humor would start to enter into my vocabulary, where I would make jokes.
Yeah.
And stuff that I was seeing in pornography, I would bring it into the bedroom. And, things that I would sort of, I like to say, coerce or manipulate my wife into engaging in, I would seek to do that. Yeah. I would never demand it or get violent or, force her, but I would try all these little subtle, tricky ways of, frankly, emotionally manipulating her in the moment, in the quote romantic moment, in order to take her down a track that I wanted to go because of the influence I had invited into my life through pornography.
Yeah. Yep. There were a few times with me as well where I never coerced and I never forced, and I'm grateful to be able to say that. But there was definitely unspoken pressure, for sure. And I think another thing that I noticed with my behavior was that my desire for sex would go way up as well.
Yes.
In other words, I'd be satisfied less after sex. Yes. Like I'd want to come back to it quicker, if that makes sense. It became kind of compulsive.
And the other thing that was a big sign to my wife is if I made a bid for sex and she was either tired or the timing wasn't right or whatever, and she would say, can we do that tomorrow? Then my reaction would be really severe. Moody, pouty, kind of acting like a rejected little kid or teenager. Just reactiveness that was not in line with the situation.
Yeah, real neediness around sex in general.
And anger, and resentment, right? Because I didn't get it when I wanted it.
Totally.
Another big sign for me.
Yeah, so those are all definitely, and we want to make it clear as we talk about the rest of these here too, guys. None of these is a clear pointing, should be looked at as he's an addict, or he's acting out again, right?
No, and that's the challenge. None of these are guaranteed.
There are a lot of things that we look to, and unfortunately, but we know that a lot of wives find themselves in this position, which is why we're talking about this today, because oftentimes when you're dealing with a spouse where there isn't consistent honesty, right, where there's a lot of gaslighting, a lot of manipulation, the topic becomes persona non grata, where they just refuse to talk about it. We're kind of left to our own devices. So when you're making conclusions about this stuff, really it is a kind of a mix of a gut feeling, you making sure you have a good support system, and then incorporating all of these different things right into a whole and kind of making judgment calls from there, I guess you could say.
Right.
But regardless of whether or not that the acting out is going on, we will say this: sexually pressuring behavior, pushing a partner to do things that are uncomfortable, trying to guilt trip or manipulate a spouse into sex, whatever you may call that. I really don't care what anyone calls it. It is not love, and it's not healthy. If we're talking about healthy versus toxic sex for 2 seconds, which is kind of what we are, right? There's some clear evidence that if that ongoing kind of pornified behavior is going on, does that mean he's acting out? Not necessarily, but whether or not he's acting out, it definitely is a clear sign that there's still some really warped and unhealthy views about sex going on, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna even pile on to that. Not only is it not appropriate, not loving, not gentle or kind, it's also immature.
Sure.
And it's abusive.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just get raw and real about it. And I can use all of those descriptions or adjectives for myself, in years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And again, guys, if you're listening, I'm not trying to get down on you and, kick your butt, but a lot of things in our sexualized culture are modeled to us as we grow up, as we go through our teen and college years, that quite frankly are horribly unhealthy and destructive.
Yes.
And just because the culture says they're the norm does not make them healthy and loving and connecting.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be cases where we're not acting out, but we do need to adjust our attitudes and our approaches to healthy sexual intimacy.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll go on here with the next question. So 2 or 3. Can someone stop without help? It's a great question. We actually get this one quite a bit. If you're going to have a conversation about this, you have to recognize a couple of things. And the first one, the most important, as we say often on here, is that sobriety is not the same thing as recovery. They are not. One is not necessarily indicative of the other. Good long-term recovery, you can make the argument, will always involve sobriety. But speaking as a guy who lived this life once upon a time, I mean, I think that, as I often tell clients, if the caliber of the gun to one's head, meaning the pressure, right, the external pressure, is big enough or great enough, I mean, I would go for long periods of time without acting out. I've worked with men who have gone months and sometimes in some cases years without acting out. They'll be sober from their addiction, but it's coming from a place of being compelled and pushed, not from a place of actual true real change, or what we call, real recovery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And here's another point to consider. You may have a guy, because you've put so much external pressure on him, right? You do this one more time, I'm divorcing you, I'm leaving you, we're done. He may go into what we call white knuckling. Yes. And be sober, but he's miserable to live with. Because an addict who's white knuckling it and denying himself of his outlet, but not doing healthy recovery or healthy living work, he could be a pretty miserable dude to be around.
Yes, indeed. So true. Gosh, where are wives? We wish we could poke their heads in from the hallway and vocalize, I know, right? That.
Yeah.
Amen. Right.
Yeah. Let me tell you about the sober Mark who was not in recovery.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gosh. Yep. I think more than one wife out there has said, geez, just go back to the porn. Holy crap. Like, that's obviously not in a long-term perspective, but I think in the moment we can be. We're addicts without new coping skills. That's a rough thing to live with.
Very rough.
So that would, I guess that's the long and short of it. And could somebody find recovery without external help? I mean, in theory, I think that's probably possible.
I've seen some rare cases. I mean, if you ask me over the last 20 plus years of professional experience, boy, I could easily count them on one hand, maybe just on a couple of fingers.
Yeah. And I've run across the occasional, I call them kind of the the white rabbit, so to speak, where for whatever reason, they come in and I see them for 5 sessions and, they just quit cold turkey after 30 years and they don't go back. Now, how truthful that is or how long that holds, I don't know. I was never one of those guys, and they always make me kind of jealous because that never happened for me.
But it's very rare.
It is. But we will say this, regardless, long-term recovery does take long-term change. What we know about how the brain works and how, neurobiological change happens is it's not an overnight thing. Mm-hmm. If you've got a guy who has decades of, ingrained, neural connections between addiction, triggers, all the different elements of the process, that just curing itself, I think, is very unlikely. Could I go to Vegas this weekend and win it big? I could. Probably won't, but I could.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've got our last question here.
Yeah. So when we go into the last set of signs and symptoms about whether he's acting out or not, this is where it gets really sketchy.
Sure.
Because these signs can be signs of so many things.
Yeah.
But we'll just give them to you. Right. So one of them we talk about is emotional variability. Mm-hmm. Well, my wife would say, I never knew which Mark was going to show up. Is he up? Is he down? Is he excited? Is he depressed? Right.
Oh, yeah.
Which guy's going to show up? And I was all over the map on that.
My wife talked about it like spinning the wheel of fortune, but it was like with emotions. It's just like, exactly. Come on down. Which version of Steve are we going to get today?
Yeah, which one are you going to see? So that emotional variability, you'll see that as a big sign, mood swings, lack of coping skills.
Yes.
Little things in life setting the guy off so that he erupts for something, turning a molehill into Everest.
Mm-hmm.
That's another lack of coping skills with the regular stuff that hits us in life is another sign.
Something to mention with that one too, with the coping skills piece, just to add to that and you used a really good term earlier, Mark, it's just kind of that immaturity when they do try to address things.
Yes.
Not that it's as simple as I think back on my own times when I would compensate. I never devolved quite to you're such a stupid head like I used to when I was on the playground, but it probably wasn't too many steps above that.
It's kind of a little older person's version of that.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah, for sure. And then of course we've already addressed this here in the last few minutes, distorted views on sexuality, what are healthy sexual norms, where you can just tell something has changed in this guy, the way he's viewing not just me and not just us in the bedroom, but the way he views others in general.
Yes.
And that was another thing that my wife could see where, my humor would change to where it would become more sexual. My language could become more sexualized. Mm-hmm. The way I would talk about women and men and, different kinds of sexual things. It just would become more just not me. Right.
Yes.
You just feel, okay, something's going on here because he doesn't typically talk this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And again, guys, none of these are guaranteed signs, but they are all, definitely serious red flags and things to look at, especially when you're dealing with somebody where you have a confirmed history of use. We never try to label one situation as all, but it is something to take a serious look at. And again, we feel for you wives who find yourselves in this position. Navigating this process is hard enough when you have a partner willing to do it with you. But when you're trying to do this solo without somebody who's willing to open up and, is kind of closed and you're sort of just navigating this yourself, we really do have kind of a special empathy for that. These are not easy things to talk about or to look at, but you do have to do what you need to do to keep you, your kids safe. And work the very best that you can with it. This week in Dare to Connect, we're doing a 2-week-long series on boundaries right now. And there's a reason why this topic is taking longer than anything we've ever done on there before, is because it is complicated when you're dealing with somebody, even who's willing, much less a situation like this.
Yeah, much less secret.
Yeah.
And then of course we get into some pretty easy ones, sexually aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Anytime it begins to cross that line, whether he's acting out or whether it's just, he's, you and I joked whether he's just a narcissistic jerk.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightheartedly because I was a jerk with narcissistic tendencies for a good part of my life.
Yeah.
Either way, it's wrong. And either way, there needs to be boundaries and stops put to that immediately.
Yes.
But yeah, sexually aggressive a sign. Here's a big one for both you and me, Steve. Low self-esteem and low self-worth, lots of guilt and shame.
Yep, absolutely.
Not just around the subject of sexuality and recovery, which often it could be if you bring up anything with us.
Remotely approaching.
Oh yeah, anything remotely approaching, questioning what I'm doing or not doing. If I'm in that acting out cycle, woo.
Why do you like that TV show? I'm not looking at porn. You're looking at porn. Forget you. Like, what are you talking about? Don't accuse me of looking at porn.
I know, just defensive and just go. And I would go into my moping around, woe is me, loser mark, piece of crap mode.
Yes.
And my wife would tell you it was just miserable to be around me when I went into that place.
Eeyorified. Eeyorified Mark.
Yes, Eeyore. Yeah. I suck. Life sucks. Never gonna change.
Oh, what if we'd known each other back then when we were both in Eeyore mode? That would have been a party.
Oh,
it's like a competitive contest whose life is more useless.
So again, we want to say once again that none of the things we've talked about are guaranteed signs. You can never say, "Oh, yep, I know what's going on." But if you weigh all of these things together, and again, I encourage all of you, especially women listening, pay attention to your gut, pay attention to your intuition, pay attention to what that little inner voice is saying. Because if you weigh all these things together and, 1 + 1 + 1, equals 4, it's probably a pretty darn good chance you're on the right track.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this coming week, we're going to, we always like to get new perspectives on this stuff. My wife's actually going to come on the Dare to Connect program.
Oh yeah, you are going to
tomorrow on Wednesday. And she's going to come on and we're going to talk about, I'm sure that
you're going to talk about Steve.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I do a good job of crucifying myself on this podcast as it is, but she in the most loving way possible can probably put it in even better vernacular than me. And we'll be talking a little bit about our story of recovery. So it's kind of a cool perspective. We'd love to have you guys join us. Come on in. The water's fine. We'd love to have you be there. So anyway, guys, have a great week. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to spend time with you, and we'll see you next time on PBSE.
Absolutely. Take care. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.